This podcast is brought to you by Connect First Credit Union. Today, we've got a really special guest, and I'm very excited about today's show. But before I introduce our special guest, I wanted to make a statement. You know what? Banks are important. But here's the thing. Canada's in a very unique banking environment, and Canada's going through some very special challenges. And certainly here in Alberta, we're feeling those challenges in a more intense way than just about anywhere else in the country. And I wanted to share just a story. In fact, my father worked for one of Canada's largest banks for 25 years. And he was a dedicated professional. He really worked hard. But here's what I remember of my father. He just always struggled to reconcile one thing. And that was that sometimes doing the right thing for that bank wasn't the same as doing the right thing for his customers, for his community. And it just always left this uncomfortable feeling in him. And I remember the day he left that organization, it was like this pressure pot that he was sitting in, just all the pressure was relieved. And his whole mindset, his whole outlook on the world seemed to change almost overnight. And I look at, the challenges we're facing in this province and the challenges we're facing as a country, quite frankly. And I think there's got to be new ways to solve these problems. I've spent over 25 years in banking, actually, and I just believe there's a different and a better way. And for me, I found it right here in the credit union system. And I think in Alberta, we're just starting to see what a credit union impact can look like as we start to reinvent ourselves as a province, as a community, as a society in the next decade, as we do transform and transition to something better. The credit union system, the credit union movement is going to be such a big part of it. And I personally believe Connect First Credit Union, we will be playing a very big part in that. And today, I don't think we could have brought a better guest to join us to talk a little bit about his own experience. He's definitely a rock star, and I'm not kidding here, rock star of the credit union movement. Eric Dillon, he's the CEO of Conexus Credit Union, one of Canada's very largest credit unions, probably one of Canada's most innovative credit unions, headquartered in Saskatchewan. And I have to say, Eric is actually a native Albertan. He's went to school here. He knows Alberta as well as any of us, but he has made a new home in Saskatchewan where he's done amazing things. And I'm so grateful to have you on the show, Eric.
Hey, thanks, Wellington. It's really cool to be here. I've watched the podcast as it's come to life, and I love the stories that you're sharing about Alberta, and maybe most importantly, what's next for Alberta.
Tell us a little bit of your journey. You were here in Alberta for a long time. You were with one of the big credit unions in this province for a long time as well.
Yeah, I went to school in Edmonton at U of A for a few years, and then landed in the credit union system. I didn't go looking for a job in the credit union when I first started, but maybe much like you, I really kind of just deeply connected with this inherent purpose of what they stand for, and worked in large and small credit unions across Alberta for the better part of about 15 years before coming to Saskatchewan. So I've been a lifer in the world of cooperative finance.
So we've got a lot of Saskatchewan folks here in Alberta. You don't have to go looking very far to find someone who's from Saskatchewan. So what was your reception like as an Albertan getting to Saskatchewan quite a few years ago now?
Well, fun fact, my family actually homesteaded at Craik, which is about kind of midway between Regina and Saskatoon. So when I drive to Saskatoon to go to one of our branches there, I drive past our own family homestead. And then my dad moved away before I was born. So, it's almost like full circle for me coming back to Saskatchewan just 2 generations later.
Now you lead, one of Canada's largest credit unions. You've done some incredible things in the last decade. Would love if you were willing to share some of your perspectives on what makes a credit union different than a bank. What can a credit union do that other banks don't do?
Yeah, well, I think if you'd bottled up the story you just shared about your dad, I think in essence, that's what separates credit unions from not just banks, but even other, I would call them, near banks or like banks. And I know there's one in Alberta. The opportunity for credit unions is that the interest of the customer, the member for us, and the interest of the institution are always perfectly aligned. I went to grad school with lots of people that work in banks, and they're nice people and they care, but there does come a point at which they have to make decisions to serve one or the other. And I would argue sometimes those decisions come at the expense of the other. And again, in a publicly traded environment, it's not right or wrong, but you're paid to enrich the shareholder. So when there's choices to be made, inherently the shareholder wins. And I would argue that means the customer doesn't always win. It's this kind of special connection of credit unions. The other thing I would argue is we're not publicly traded, and the capital that members have in credit unions is very patient. And so we're given the opportunity as leaders to build, kind of generationally versus building to the next quarterly earnings statement that we have to make to analysts. It's a gift of the structure that we should all as leaders fully leverage at a time where we're going through unbelievable amounts of transformation and disruption.
And maybe let's go there a little bit. Conexus has done some really, really innovative things. Just before we started this call, you shared a couple of examples. I'd love for you to share some examples of like the things that you've done leading your credit union that really stand out from the others.
I just want to make one small but important correction. So you said earlier, Eric, great things that you've done. Well,
Yes.
Conexus is the product of 1,000 people.
Right on.
And we get really great people who care deeply about what it is we're trying to solve. And they kind of enroll and come and build cool stuff. And it's like a quarterback. You get way too much credit when things go well, and you get way too much blame when things don't go well. So I'm just kind of like the head coach and chief cheerleader. But those attributes, I think, for us were really important. And so, much like Alberta, Saskatchewan's a commodity-driven economy, tough times, not just in COVID, but I would argue even before COVID, clearly the commodity cycle wasn't favorable to economies like ours. And it caused some stress. And so we were thinking about what do businesses need, and how to support the growth of small, medium-sized enterprises. In Saskatchewan, credit unions have 50% market share of the small business market. So we are a bigger financial support structure than the Royal Bank is in Saskatchewan. So we have a very prominent role to play in the growth of small business. But we were noticing these really important kind of shifts about how businesses grew. There was more towards technology, clearly, more towards that. I think young people were seeing entrepreneurship as a viable career choice. And so we started to think about, well, how do we support the growth of ecosystems? We did a bunch of research around the world. And fast forward a few years, we've stood up our own incubator. We have a venture fund in the market today. We'll have a second venture fund in the market. Stay tuned, maybe in the next 30 or 40 days. People are saying, well, what business does a credit union have in private equity and venture capital and incubation? And I would say we've been supporting small businesses for 90 years. This is just a 2020 version of what that looks like. The second example that I shared before we started was we distributed a bunch of federal government money through the CEBA program to small businesses. And it was really important for us that credit unions were included in that announcement from the government. Well, of course, our banker friends in the meetings with government leading up to the announcement were the thing that kind of they were so focused on was how much they were going to get paid to distribute critical federal government money to small business. And our team was in the meetings and, of course, we think differently. So they were like, can we just get past this and move on to getting the money to where it really needs to be at a critical time? So eventually, of course, banks wouldn't roll it out unless they were paid. So and everybody get paid the same amount. So we got this administration fee from the government, and literally we're looking at it going, what do we do with this money? We could put it to net income just like all the other banks do. Or we said, maybe what we should do is find ways to take this money and distribute it into our community to really reward people who are making a difference at a really, really challenging time. So they were making lunches, they were driving seniors, making gifts for people who were isolated, like these unbelievable stories. So we said to our members, tell us great stories of people doing really spectacular things at a very dark time. And to fill my cup, I would literally come to work every day and watch the videos. And I would just get so much energy from seeing people respond in really, really creative ways. And then we took the money and we gave it to these people to kind of accelerate the work they were doing and give it a bit of fuel. And it was a powerful demonstration of how credit unions are different from banks. Banks were arguing about how much to get. We immediately tried to find ways to give it back.
And maybe that, builds right into the question. Credit unions are quite significant. You mentioned 50% market share in small business. They're quite significant in Saskatchewan. Yet I would probably argue there's a lot of people in Alberta who haven't really haven't discovered the opportunity with credit unions to date. Why have credit unions been so successful in Saskatchewan?
We're a small province by population. There's only 1 million people here. And so clearly there was lots of times in our history as a province where the banks came when times were good, commodities were high, the province was rolling, and then they equally left as quickly when the province was challenged. And so I think Saskatchewan had this unique situation where the banks were deploying capital here to profit off the back of Saskatchewan. And then, of course, when times were tough, they were nowhere to be found, and the capital went elsewhere where the bank could earn a higher return, as is required. It's not evil, but that's what they're incented to do. And I think, what we hear from small businesses is they want somebody to be with them through this and through the ups and the downs, and to really appreciate, their wins, their successes, but also their do differently's, and find creative ways to support them through, what we know is an economic cycle of a small business. And so I think we've been really good at living that promise. And now it's funny when banks come back when times are good and they try to go and kind of cherry pick accounts. Small businesses are smarter than the banks give them credit for. And I think it's like, not so fast, because the last time I needed you, you were you kind of headed for the exits.
Right on.
And so we've built out a really great reputation for being kind of savvy risk managers who know this market better than anybody else. And the decisions are made here. And we market the fact that it's not super sexy, but if we have a really large, complicated deal, our credit committee will really literally go stand in the business, the three of us, because it's me and two of my colleagues, and we'll look around and say, okay, business owner, here's the risk things that are, important for us to manage. And you tell us, here's the business problems you're trying to solve. And then literally we'll solve it on the factory floor. And the banks can't touch that.
Pretty hard to do that from Bay Street or wherever they're sitting.
Pretty hard
right?
to do that from Toronto.
Yeah, right on. And maybe on that note, for those who say, hey, I don't need a credit union, what you are doing when you help or you support the credit union is you're helping other organizations who maybe can't get help from the other banks. And I really liked your story there, Eric. Alberta is a bit of a different place. Credit unions have been here since the 1930s. We were created in the Dust Bowl. You know that story. You've been here.
Yep.
We started in the Dust Bowl of the 30s, but probably we haven't had the same traction as you've seen in Saskatchewan or maybe some other provinces like BC where credit unions are very, very substantial. And I'd love to hear your advice to us as the credit unions in general in Alberta, what should we be doing differently?
I think there's one really important difference in Alberta. So you still have the big publicly traded banks. You still have a very robust, super creative credit union sector. And then there's this thing in the middle, and this thing is called ATB. But I would suggest, the difference that I was articulating earlier about the unique kind of marriage of the shareholder interest and the customer interest in a credit union doesn't exist in a bank, 100% aligned in a credit union. And then at ATB, I think they market themselves kind of like a credit union, but the shareholder is the government. Let's not forget that. And while we might say, well, the government is actually owned by the people, with the greatest respect to elected officials, sometimes they do very curious things that don't always serve the interest of everyday people. And I would suggest that there's lots of examples in ATB's history where they've become an instrument of public policy that wasn't necessarily there to connect with the everyday Albertan. And I think there's a real opportunity for credit unions to kind of reaffirm that they're the only one in this market that can credibly live that promise. And then if you think about payments modernization and open banking and all those things that are coming soon, to banking near you, I would much rather be the small, nimble, closely connected to customer institution than I would be the $1 trillion Royal Bank, or to be super candid, the $60 billion ATB. I would much rather be the small, nimble, agile, closest to the customer institution that cares deeply about their success. I think the opportunity for credit unions, to be honest, has never been greater. It certainly hasn't been in my career.
Now, You're a CEO of a very substantial credit union, Eric. Can you tell us a little bit about like what keeps you up at night, like what you're thinking about as you drive to work every day? What's driving you?
Well, I mean, the what keeps me up at night is just the level of pace of change. And when I started in the business, it was easy to know everything you needed to know about the business and all the things that had to be done. Today, some days it just feels like you're hanging on for dear life, and I know a little bit about this and a little bit more about something else. But boy, it's a really good thing we have 1,000 smart people all getting up every day to think about how to serve members, because it's just a very complex environment to run a credit union today. And then, of course, all these kind of forces at play that I spoke about a minute ago that are coming soon to us. But I do think culturally, if we can find a way to build speed and agility in how we connect with members, and then give them really rich insight about their money, because again, nobody will give them insight through analytics in a ways that helps them succeed. Other institutions will give them insight that incents the sale of a product.
Right.
And I think if we can use this rich information we have about members and link that completely to their success competitively, it's like the holy grail, because competitors can't touch that. It's the sustainable, differentiated competitive advantage that all the textbooks talked about when I was in grad school, and competitors can't replicate it. Even if they wanted to, they can't replicate it.
You touched on a couple things. You and your team have built out a culture at Conexus that really has enabled people to start thinking more creatively around solving problems. And you've identified some of those examples. And I think when I look at Alberta, I look at Saskatchewan, I look at the enterprises, the businesses that are going to transition, transform to take on the challenges of the future, they need to be solving problems differently. Do you want to share some of the secret sauce that you guys have been able to bring into work at Conexus?
You'd like to say that I think we're making great progress, but it's like one of those things that's just never done. So, we're constantly thinking about how to be better, to be faster, to be more connected. But the other advantage I think the credit unions have tied to this is just problems aren't going to get solved by a bunch of technical experts in a room by themselves. The world today is going to be bringing people together to solve very complex problems. And I think credit unions have to stop thinking about themselves as a financial services provider and start thinking about themselves as kind of a catalyst for economic growth and collaboration in communities. And I think the Cultivator is a great example of that. When we started to do research about what does incubation look like, you need mentors, you need legal, you need accounting, you need sources of capital, you need places for business to collide and grow. And then we realized, okay, so we have all those things in Saskatchewan. And then we found one important thing. Well, there needs to be a well-funded catalyst at the middle of it. And we're like, that's us. Now we're going to have to do this. And so we found a way to bring community together. And now we've created 170 jobs, 52 companies. These companies have 20 million in revenue. 40% of these companies are female founded. Speaking to you a day after International Women's Day, we're very excited about the opportunities that exist to support female founders. But we're not doing it by ourselves. We've got partners like MMP bringing accounting. We've got a local law firm as a lawyer in residence. And they're doing this because they care about community and they care about supporting us as a partner. So I think we've just found a way with our deep 100-year tentacles to bring people together to solve very complex problems. And I think that's the enormous opportunity for credit unions.
And you can't understate the power of community. And when you look at the financial institution you deal with as just, some place you can do transactions, you're missing that opportunity to be a part of a community and to support others that can benefit from a community. I think it's just magical what you have done there. And I tell you this, speaking from Connect First, we're really, really excited to try and replicate some of the things you have done in Saskatchewan here in Alberta.
Well, I know we've talked about working together on a few, so we're pretty optimistic about sharing both what we've learned and then learning from what others are doing. Because I think, again, there's 300 credit unions across Canada, and if we all start innovating in real time and sharing openly, I think it's a pretty powerful group of cooperatives that can change communities.
Yeah, right on. And probably a lot of people who've never dealt with a credit union don't appreciate that there's a movement, there's a system where people are working together and sharing ideas. So when you think you might be giving something up by dealing with a credit union as opposed to a bank. I don't know if that's so true. In fact, I think it's the opposite because we share so much in the system. And being only a year into the credit union movement myself, Eric, I have to share, it kind of blew me away. There's so much goodness in this system that is transparently shared across the organizations that it was eye-opening to me. And even yourself, you reached out soon after I joined Connect First, actually, which was very kind of you to offer help. When does that happen when you're working outside of the credit union system? I don't think that happens very often at all.
Yeah, and I think there's things in real time like payments, and of course the work we're doing with venture capital. We have investors from across the country in our venture fund supporting the growth of ag and ag tech entrepreneurs. And we've had people like reach out and say, "Hey, I've heard about this. How can I help?" And it's have another chat next week with a bunch of credit unions in Manitoba.
That's awesome. So the name of the show is What's Next Alberta, but I think we're going to, for today's episode, special one time, we're going to extend that to What's Next, Alberta and Saskatchewan, because we do have so much in common, as you were sharing earlier. Like the economic dynamics of the two places, there's a lot in common. But if you were to look ahead at the next decade, like we know in Alberta, it's going to be a challenging decade. There's no question, but it's exciting. There's going to be opportunities. We're betting on a really bright future here. What's your prediction for the next decade in Saskatchewan?
I'm generally a pretty optimistic guy, and I would say out of challenging times comes the opportunity for kind of reflection and maybe big steps forward as opposed to baby steps forward. And I think what we're seeing both in terms of the behavior of members and financial consumers, the erosion of trust at the big five banks, like on the Edelman Trust Index, financial services is the second or third lowest industry vertical on the Edelman Trust Index, which tells you that banking has not served people. But I think this, the pandemic and economic challenges that it's brought is going to be a great launch pad for credit unions to redefine not like banking, but what does it mean to support the economic growth of consumers and businesses and farms and communities? And I think we're trying really hard to find ways to do that in new and unique ways. And again, the ones that we found in the near term, they're not places banks want to play. And even if they did want to, they couldn't credibly show up in that space. And what we're hearing through the pandemic from our members, our financial well-being scores went up in the pandemic. Our net promoter score went up in the pandemic. I guarantee you, if you were to test that against banks, both of those wouldn't be true. So we genuinely reached out to members and said, this can be a tough time. Let's set you up to be more resilient. Not let's borrow more money because it's better for the institution. And what our members said is, thank you. We really appreciate you doing that for us. And then what we found was their resilience went up. So which institution can say in the middle of a pandemic, our members are financially better off, and here's the data to prove it, than they were going into the pandemic? We can say that about our members and put it on a billboard, and it's true, and we've got data to back it up. The banks can't deliver that. And so I think this opportunity for us is going to be enormous to really show people the value of local and authentic and trust, and redefining what does it mean to have a partner who's really invested in my success, whether that's a business or a consumer.
I love it, Eric. And I have one last question, and this is a question we ask every guest, and I couldn't think of a better guest to ask this question to. So we're on a journey at Connect First to literally reimagine ourselves. Like we were previously 4 credit unions that came together. We're starting over, and we're trying to reimagine ourselves as a credit union that's built for the 2020s. What advice do you have for us as we're on our journey?
We talk often about cooperative principles, and I think if you were to ask a consumer to recite the cooperative principles, I don't think they could, list the 7. I do think they could list the attributes of an institution that they want to believe exists in the marketplace. And trusted, puts my needs at the center of what they do, uses analytics to help me succeed, not to sell that information to another provider in a way that's creepy and distrustful, and that brings communities and ecosystems together in ways that solve complex problems in ways that we hadn't thought about, like social finance, incubators, supporting the growth of small business, thought leadership, gender equality. I think these are all ways that if credit unions do those things really, really well, I think the if we stand here 5 years from today and look backwards, people will see more clearly the difference that exists in our industry. And I'm really excited to be in the credit union system today, more excited than I was 25 years ago when I started.
Eric, you have been nothing but generous with your time with us. We were so excited to have you here. Any final words you want to share with our audience before we let you get back to work?
No, I would just say we really value the partnership we have with Connect First. We share lots of things between the organizations, not just the attributes of members, but work that goes on. And I'm really glad I got asked to participate, and we'll be here cheering for Connect First as one of your number one cheerleaders.
Thank you, Eric. And we're cheering for you too. So thank you for joining us. Next steps. So for me, that was a really fun conversation. In fact, I've been really looking forward to having the opportunity to get Eric on camera and talk a little bit about the credit union system, because truly he's built it, he's experienced it. He and his team have done amazing things in Saskatchewan. And certainly when I bring us back here to Alberta and our challenge and what we want to play our role and how we want to play our role at Connect First to make a difference. You know, Eric talked about the credit union difference and how we're built on values around really doing what's right for members, which is really what we believe in. And when he talked about the erosion of trust in financial services, there's so much important work that, you know, we need to be doing in the credit union system to change the way Albertans see financial institutions, because we do behave differently at a credit union. But here's a question I have for you, and that is, if you're not dealing with a credit union, do you feel that the organization you do deal with, are they aligned with your values and what's important to you and what's important to your community? Because if the answer is no to that, I would just ask that you give us a second look, you give us an opportunity to share our story. Credit unions are going to be a big part of the decade ahead. And I know us at Connect First Credit Union, we're going to be doing everything we can to play our part to help Alberta transition and transform so that we can look forward to a really, really bright future together. And if you like what you heard today, share it with your network or subscribe. Thank you for joining us. See you next time on What's Next Alberta.